There we go. What is up, guys? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Today we have my great friend Jimmy Easterling here from the Fishing Coach YouTube channel, Central Arkansas Hammer, forward-facing guru. So, the anti-Randy on the on the podcast live stream today. And what we wanted to talk about is the evolution of baits with forward-facing sonar and how different trends have come and gone over the years, as well as some new baits and techniques that we feel like are going to be the hottest baits in 2025. Stuff that a lot of pros have kept secret, things that we have been having a lot of success with, and maybe just some juice that you aren't going to hear on a lot of other podcasts, live streams, and videos and things like that. So, Jimmy, thanks for joining me today.
Man, I appreciate it, Johnny. And it's funny you say like the anti-Randy, but dude, 3 years ago when you brought me in this world, I was still just like a all-around more fisherman. But then, as I told you, that first 6 months working for you, all that time I spent on the water during the fall, this time of year, because I normally was a football coach, it was a struggle in a way. But then I decided, hey, I got this forward-facing sonar unit. I am going to go all in. And I knew some people were already doing it, and I was kind of talking to you behind the scenes, and we're making content, and like I said, but I went all in and wanted to learn it. And then for the upcoming year, I wanted to see how we could use baits different with it than we ever have before. So that's what we're about to talk about here today. I know you said talk about new baits and how baits the last 2 years have kind of changed how we fished with forward facing or not. Like even, you've shared lately how, you've caught still big fish without it. Like you don't got to have it, as we know, to catch fish. But that's what I talk about baits, how they change, and new baits. Let's get into it, man.
For sure. Well, there's a couple of kind of high-level things that I wanted to get into to start off. Before we get there, I want to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of the Fish the Moment podcast and live stream content, and that's Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford's been an awesome sponsor of the Fish the Moment long-form content for years now. They're one of the few non-endemic brands that actually sponsor pro bass fishermen, and they have a great product that's easy to find. You can find it in a lot of your local gas stations, dollar stores, and in the Walmart checkout aisle. If you guys see a bag of Bridgeford beef jerky, some of their summer sausage, or any other Bridgeford products, definitely check them out. They are fantastic snacks to take to the lake, and again, more than anything, it's a brand that supports bass fishing. Very few brands like that out there, so definitely check out Bridgeford if you see your local stores. It just helps support this channel and also supports bass fishing, so awesome. Let's jump into it then, Jimmy. So one kind of interesting comment that I heard when I was doing like the 4-hour Bass Talk live breakdown of the Bassmaster rule change. I was on with Justin Hamner, Jordan Lee, all of these different guys, and Panger brought me in with 2 classic champs at the same time, which was very intimidating, but we worked our way through it. But one thing that Justin Hamner, who's the reigning Bassmaster Classic champion, asked Jordan Lee and myself, he's like, guys, why don't you just use forward-facing sonar to enhance techniques you're already good at? Why are you trying to come up with a new style of fishing with forward-facing sonar? Now, I thought that was a really interesting comment because Hamner caught them well before forward-facing sonar. He's older than I am, so he knew how to do it before. He was an Alabama stick before that, but now he's really good with it. And I feel like that was kind of the first starting point for forward-facing sonar, and that's how I started using it. I basically took what I was doing offshore and had forward-facing sonar as kind of a little bit of an add-on, something that I used to maybe be a little bit more efficient, but I didn't revolve my fishing around it. And I think that you can do that in some situations very effectively. And I know that you've done that, Jimmy, kind of getting started. So maybe walk us through the beginning of your forward-facing sonar journey of how you went, I guess, to take what you already were comfortable with and started using it with forward-facing.
Yeah, one of the biggest things, though, Johnny, is like we had a foundation. My age, as I've talked before, and people listening, I'm Matt Becker's age. I'm around Jordan Lee's age, Jacob Wheeler, Cannell. My age of people, which I'm older than Johnny, guys, but Johnny was one of the first guys, and he's like 4 years younger than me, okay? Johnny was part of that generation that had a chance to learn side imaging, and he learned it really, really early, and you can tell with his teaching. I got to fish with Johnny and learn it with him, but I did a lot of my offshore fishing with 2D sonar and mapping, and that mapping, guys, was on my iPhone, for example. Like I might not have had it on a graph. So I was already comfortable fishing offshore. And I was like, hey, when I first got it, I used it like you did. Hey, there's a brush pile. I'm going to throw my worm there, my crankbait. Then I started doing the deal of throwing at fish, but my lakes had a lot of trash fish in it at the time. So I didn't get a good chance to always throw around bass. But then when I, making the transition to full time with you, I got to go to lakes that had a lot of bass. And I got to learn how bass reacted. And then I took my skills, used that, but then I kind of got bored. And I'm not fishing tournaments. But I say bored as in I wanted to learn new ways to catch them. I wanted to learn new techniques. And I say new techniques. Guys, I've caught fish with the flutter spoon before, but I used the forward facing and the flutter spoon, and it enhanced it. And like Hamner told you, use it for your strengths, and that's what he's doing. Like on my forward facing trips with clients, we go out there and do these forward facing offshore fishing trips. Guys, I had a trip Friday. We graph for an hour, just like Johnny does. He graphs for 4 hours because Beaver Lake, it's hard to find them. But we graphed this lake for an hour. We found them and caught them. They bit, and then we graphed again. And then my guy was like, hey, you really don't like start fishing until you find them. I was like, 100%, and then we're going to look at them. But we might not always throw a minnow at them. We still the other day caught them out of grass with a jerkbait and with another bait we'll talk in a minute. So, but I wanted to learn new ways to catch them, and that's what I did with forward facing. We're about to talk about all these baits, We're about to talk about the hair jig, a football jig, and we're about to talk about this other cool stuff.
For sure, and it's interesting because if you look at kind of the first few years of forward-facing sonar, anglers really were using baits and techniques that they were comfortable with. So you had a lot of the, I would say the old guard, the guys who were there before forward-facing sonar, they were catching most of their fish with a drop shot and jerk bait. Those were like the two most dominant baits. Some guys were throwing a little swim bait too. But that was baits that everyone was throwing before forward-facing sonar. People were throwing jerk baits a lot. They were throwing swim baits a lot. And they were throwing drop shots a lot. But if you look at the 2023 and 2024 results, you don't see a lot of those three baits except for the jerkbait. The jerkbait still is a player a lot of times. But if you look at kind of these new age anglers, the guys who are coming up through the opens, they really have figured out different baits and techniques that work really well with Tyler Williams, as Devin points out here in the chat, with his jig. And we'll talk about why he's so effective with his jig. We have guys who are really good with the minnow, the Jig Head Minnow, Demiki rig style deal. We have guys, again, who are really good with a jerk bait, but then we also have some obscure baits like the dice baits and all these other crazy things. A lot of guys are really good with a wacky rig worm. We're going to get through all these baits, but I do think that there's a big distinction because there's these anglers who learned how to fish without forward facing, and they just used it to try to enhance their techniques like we talked about and use traditional baits. And those anglers aren't as effective now as anglers who developed skills with forward facing sonar. They built their foundation of fishing with forward facing sonar, and they found baits that work for the application. I think that's the more intriguing side of it, to me at least, is like, who are the guys who they could choose any bait they wanted to learn. They didn't have 20 years of like, I like throwing crankbaits or I like throwing jerkbaits. They're like, I can pick any bait. What bait is the easiest and the best for me to catch fish with forward-facing sonar? So that's what we want to get into today, talk about some of those, trending baits and different things. But to start off, Jimmy, I want you to talk about your flutter spoon, because you are the flutter spoon man. If you go to Jimmy's social media pages, the Fishing Coach YouTube channel, you're going to see all of his videos with this big flutter spoon, and he is an absolute hammer with it, more than anybody I know. And now there's a lot of guys who are using it. We saw it at Smith Lake. We see it with guys fishing in the NPFL with Kyle Welcher won a tournament, I think, or did really well at Lake Pickwick with it. So talk about the flutter spoon. Why is that a good forward-facing bait, and what have you learned with it?
So it was 3 years ago when I was writing down, like, hey, what are some baits that can be inhibited and enhanced with using forward-facing sonar, and I can fish like I never did before. I wrote all my baits down, and I saw a flutter spoon there. And I was like, hey, time out. It's a big hunk of metal. This right here, guys, and I'll talk about why I like this one. They're all flutter spoons catch fish, guys. I'm not, like, tied to any of them. This is the Dixie Jet Talon. But as I wrote them all down, and I thought this is a big hunk of metal, metal will show up easy on the forward facing unit. And I thought about a glide bait. Hey, a glide bait's big. I've seen those fish go crazy for it. It draws fish. Maybe this could do it too. And my first kind of like experience throwing it, guys, I watched them come out of nowhere off the bottom, out of like, and that's when I started learning how fish will get so glued to the bottom and you can never really see them always. Now I know what to kind of look for now, but at the time I didn't. And this dude drew them. And then my first like 2 fishing trips, I caught fish with it. And this was in April, guys. An April period is, I know fish are on beds. So then that year on, I was like, I'm going to throw this every fishing trip. And I started throwing it in areas you never would think about, swimming over brush piles. You know, you have your ledges and drops. I throw it in timber, but it takes a lot of practice. It's not easy to cast. And you see this thing. I mean, one reason I started throwing this one too was Johnny. Johnny was like, dude, try the Talon out. You know, he mentioned Cody Huff. It has the 3 hooks already, which some people thinks it looks crazy, you know, with the 3 treble hooks.
Well, it makes it easier to snag them, you know?
Yeah, you think you can snag them, but you actually don't like. And there's times where the hooks are outside the mouth. Guys, I have chest cam footage of them jumping and throwing this thing, and it hooks them on the outside. So it kind of actually helps you catch them at times. But the big thing about it is for me now, knowing when to put it down and keep throwing it, because there are days they don't eat it. Like I've told you, there was one lake down here in South Arkansas, they'll eat this thing, but my last time there, they didn't want it. I put it down, picked up the minnow, cracked them. So I now have so much skill with it, but it is something that draws them. It catches big fish, but it catches numbers. My last week at Lake Maumelle with the other one I like to throw that's now more popular is the Falcon Spoon. It's the skinnier version, looks more like a traditional flutter spoon, but it's one you've seen all the pros guys throwing out. It caught a lot of fish at Lake Maumelle that were 12, 14 inches. So they catch numbers, not just as bigs. But one thing about this one, though, it's wider, guys. And so with it being wider, watching from forward-facing sonar and me in a pool, it flutters a little slower. And it flutters backwards, but not as fast. And I like that over the traditional ones from just my experience.
That's awesome. And I mean, that bait works really well when you have big forage the bass are feeding on. So you need to have either fish they're feeding on big gizzards, yellow bass, crappie, things like that. You're not going to catch them on lakes where they don't have that big forage they're feeding on. But, I mean, I know a lot of guys who are catching them on Beaver Lake in Arkansas, which the quality of fish in Beaver Lake is not great. I mean, if you catch 15 pounds in a tournament, you're basically winning 90% of the time, unless it's the winter and the fish are super fat. And so you're dealing with maybe like, to win a tournament, you need a 3-pound average. But that big flutter spoon catches a lot of big fish on beaver because it draws the few big ones that are in that lake. So it's not necessarily a size of the fish issue. It's more about the size of the forage. So that will catch a 12-incher, 15-incher if there's big forage in the area. Now, if you have a lake that all has tiny little 2-inch gizzards and that's or 2-inch threadfin shad, and that's the only bait you have in the area, the flutter can potentially work, but it's not the best option. Would you agree with that, Jimmy?
100% I agree with it. And that's what's been kind of affecting me moving back to Hot Springs. So, like, they ate that thing real good in the post-spawn period. And, like, I told you guys, like, Lake de Grey this year, they have ate that thing in the evening to nighttime period, like in that transition to night, where I'm fishing some of these same areas and they're not eating it during the day. But do need to be in areas of the lake where there are bigger gizzard and you have fish that are feeding on potential, what I think crappie as well. I know some people think that's crazy that a bass might eat a crappie. In Texas, you guys get it. But I've even talked to a few game and fish biologists in Arkansas, and they're like, yeah, man, whatever can fit in that fish's mouth, it can eat. And there are bass that will eat crappie. So I think that's a big thing is if you're around a brush pile with a bunch of small crappie, that right there can trigger a big bite. But with it too, we fish this because of forward facing, guys. If you take forward facing off my boat, I'll get my football jig and crankbait back out, but I'll throw this in areas due to the unit. I mean, that just is what it is. So gotta make sure that you know that. I'm not throwing this. I'm watching it the whole time. And if you watch my channel and watch my videos, I fish it differently. I still, to me, even this year, I've not caught a fish that, you know, here I am jacking it like the old school spoon. Now, people are doing it, but it's not been me. I fish it other ways. The reel, like a hair jig, I swim it. They'll eat that thing when you swim it and just kill it. I mean, there's a lot to it that's been pretty cool to learn from the years of the flutter spoon.
For sure. And there's a question here from Justin. He says, tried throwing the flutter spoon at Table Rock the last BFL and had trouble having them commit. He was throwing the 5-inch. Any advice? And I guess on my side with throwing the flutter spoon, there's a couple things. One, it's not going to be a bait for every day. There's going to be certain days where they bite it a lot better, and there's certain times of the day. So you might fish the same group of fish in the morning, the afternoon, and like right before dark, like Jimmy mentioned, and maybe they only bite it in the afternoon. Maybe they only bite it for an hour window. And so a lot of times it's not necessarily that you're doing anything wrong, even with your retrieve, though that can help. Sometimes they just don't want to commit to it because they need to be in a certain mood to eat that big piece of metal. The other thing, though, is a 5-inch spoon, I feel like, is not as effective at drawing the fish and getting them to bite as a 6 to 8-inch spoon. And would you agree with that, Jimmy?
I do agree, and Johnny's right there. That's what I kind of shared earlier is I've fished it enough to I can read the fish, but it depends on your tournament now. If you have 14 pounds, which is a good bag at Table Rock, depending on the year, but you're trying to get that kicker, you can keep throwing it for that kicker potentially. But there are days they do not eat it, and for me, how I fish, I'm doing these lessons, I'm teaching people. I'm not fishing a tournament, so I'll put it down and do other stuff. But there'll be days I'm with clients, and I fish it over 2 groups of fish over a brush pile, and I'm like, hey, the day's not the day. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, hey, they're just right now I can just tell that fish would have came up there and knocked it out. You knocked out of your hand. So you're going to just learn from adapting through the point. But if you're in a tournament, you need one bite. I'm going to throw that. Definitely a team series. Like if I jump in the team series this year, which I might in a couple, like there's a chance I'm going to have my little Halton Howard, if he's watching, shout out to Halton. If Halton's fishing with me, he's throwing it, and I'm going to throw all the other stuff. Like I'm just going to have him throw just the flutter spin. And so you'll learn from experience.
Nice. So next question, when it comes to spoons, let's see here. Is it best to kind of pull them out with the flutter spoon and then finesse them out? So this is an interesting question. So I know I've done this personally.
Good question.
Sometimes you'll have a brush pile, for example, or like fish that are around the lip of a ledge, and you can rip that spoon away from the brush and it will pull the big ones they're seeing in the base of a brush pile or around the lip of a ledge, and you'll get them up. And sometimes they won't eat the spoon, but then you can follow up with a drop shot, with a minnow, with something else, and get those fish to bite. And so again, it's drawing those fish out of the cover where maybe you get them a little bit excited, you get them in a little bit of a feeding mode, and then you bring something more finessey and you can catch them. So that's pretty sneaky right there, but that is something that guys do for sure. Would you agree, Jimmy?
Yes, I was about to say I've done it where, like, I would always say, like, for example, if you have somebody with you fishing, or depending, man, because it's kind of, it's kind of like you're playing with fire. But I've done it to where you pull them out with the minnow, and like if they're not going to eat it, I reel it in real fast, and then they're kind of there. All of a sudden, I'll flip that spoon past them and work it, and they turn around like going back to brush pile and see, and it's like an instant, like they're like, hey, I got to get it, and they eat it. So that's like kind of what you're sharing there.
Yeah, and that's the reverse of it, but it works both of them. So, yeah, pretty interesting there. So that's a kind of, that was your first bait that you really got dialed in with. And I know your kind of whole journey, we talk all the time. So it transitioned from flutter spoon, though, to then when you moved to Central Arkansas, you became Mr. Jig Head Minnow. You're like, Jimmy Connell over here, catching 10-pounders on Lake DeGray, giant fish. And every time I talk to Jimmy, from basically January through April, he's like, dude, I caught 20 fish on a minnow, 40 fish on a minnow. I catch them on a minnow. I don't have any other rod. I only have 4 spinning rods in the deck of the boat. And this is the guy who, when I first brought him on to work Fish the Moment, the only spinning rod he had looked like something that someone got at a garage sale, and it had like monofilament line strung on it, and it was like a 2-piece spinning rod or something ridiculous. So that was his spinning rod setup. And now he has the full setup. He's got 17 spinning rods in his boat. He's all about it. He has every minnow head and bait ever made. So tell us about your transition to the minnow and what you've learned there.
So, yeah, the minnow, that's what's funny. Like, people that know me for real, like Johnny knows, I threw a spinning rod when I was like 15, 16 years old in junior bass tournaments. I hated spinning rods. I'd rather just crack them with a big, bait cast or whatever. I moved to Southwest Arkansas where Lake Millwood's a player, big fisher down there. I'm fishing Texas. Broken Bow, which Broken Bow, you guys know, I'd love to go there now with my knowledge. I was talking to someone about that earlier. But Johnny was already catching with a spinning rod when he moved to Northwest Arkansas. He's like, Jimmy, you got to get on it. I was like, dude, I'm not doing it down here. But I started seeing it done on Fork and Sam Rayburn. I just went blank on our guy's name, Denali Pro, Michael Neal. Michael Neal was the first one that opened my eyes of it at Rayburn. And I was like, man, I need to get on this. And then, Johnny hired me. He gave me a couple. And the transition to my minnow before I moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, was your hover rig. So I got the hover rigs, and here's one paired up right here with the freeloader. So, guys, the hover rig was what I got these before Johnny and Matt put them out in the market. So I started playing with them and getting pretty comfortable with them. But I was playing with the minnow, but I didn't have confidence with it. I wasn't throwing the right heads. I wasn't working it right. I was doing a lot of learning with it. I caught fish with it some days, but I just didn't have the confidence. Then one of my kids that I've coached, he's now 21 years old. He's a young man. He was starting to catch him with it pretty good. And me and him went on a fishing trip, and I just kind of saw the little bits about it. And I was like, hey, I get on the water so much. I'm going to dial it in. And guys, it's not meant for everybody because I teach people, I see, but I got it dialed. Like, I'm confident with it. Johnny knows. He said January through April. You can say through August. It's on my deck. It was very effective for us in June on some days, July. Lately, they've not ate it until Friday when they all of a sudden ate it. But Friday, we were throwing the new rolling strolling jig head, which has that eye, guys, as you see, that's now parallel to the base of the hook. So this one caught us Friday. Friday, we had 18.5 pounds at Lake Hamilton, and this caught 2 of the 5 of that. And those were fish that were 20 to 30 foot. The thermocline broke. Anyway, from there. But, guys, it took a lot of practice, but I'm on the water a lot. And I dialed it in. And like I've said, it's not meant for everybody. It somehow happened with me, but it came from practice on the water. This year, I told somebody earlier, I've been on the water 41% of the days. And so and last year I was on the water a lot too. Johnny knows, I'm on the water a lot. And I teach. I'm a coach, a teacher. As a coach and a math teacher, I had to learn stuff and apply it and see if I could figure it out. And if I couldn't, how can I teach it? And this was one of those things when I kind of figured out the shake and the jig head and how the fish, man, it's just kind of gone from there. But I'm excited to see where it's going to go because I don't think – it's deadly. It's a good bait at times, but I think a lot of people are throwing it not knowing what they're doing, and they're affecting fish, and they're going to get used to it. I think that's happening. It's happening already. What do you think about it, Johnny?
So, yeah, a couple things on that. One, that head right there is interesting. That's the Queen's Tackle. It's has a unique hook in it. It's tungsten, right? Tungsten head?
Yes, this is tungsten. It's the rolling strolling jig head. Here, I'll do my little thing here so y'all can see it better.
Oh, there
you go.
Rolling strolling right there. So that jig head is interesting. It causes that bait to roll. And the idea with the strolling, guys, just to kind of give you a high-level overview, the idea is you want to have that weight positioned above the center of gravity of that bait to cause it to roll. So what's happening is that weight, when it's on slack line, the belly of the minnow is actually going to sit up. So I have a minnow here, and you can show it, Jimmy, kind of like how I'm showing it. Yep. But it's going to sit up. And then when you pop your slack, it's going to roll the bait over to the other side and then roll it over to the other side. And so that's the idea, is that you're causing that bait to flash and to roll. And so I suck at throwing a minnow. I'm honestly really bad at throwing a minnow. I was out with Matt Pangrek the other day. He was schooling me on the minnow game. He's all about it. I'm not a minnow guy. I threw it a lot when no one was throwing it. I actually started doing the Demiki stuff, Jimmy, 3.5 years ago. And
4 years ago. It was 2020.
2020. So I was all on the minnow stuff. And I was like, I actually talked to Jacob Wheeler on the phone on the off season one year. And I was like, dude, I am smashing in my Demiki rig. I think I could throw a Demiki rig every single day of the week, year round, and catch him. And this was 2021. And this was actually before he did the freeloader thing on whichever, it was Gunnersville, where he won that Gunnersville tournament. Yeah, Gunnersville. So anyway, I was on this early, but I wasn't mastering it. I literally was throwing the minnow at fish and just kind of reeling it and keeping it above them, keeping it away, and they ate it. And those fish ate it like it was they'd never seen a bait before. And now I can't get them to eat it like that at all. And I think that I was spoiled where I basically could just throw any minnow. I was throwing like a 3/8 ounce jig head, working it. I wasn't rolling it. I was just reeling it by them, and they would come up and crush it. And so I was like in the very, very early stages of it. Well, now guys are really focused on that rolling action of the bait where it rolls side to side. There's a lot of very specific baits like the Depth Sakamata shads, the Raid fish rollers, you have the fish arrow, you have all these little baits that everyone's throwing. They use light heads, different size heads, different hook positions. I am so far behind on it that I can't even keep up. A lot of it has to do with the way you work your rod, all these different things. And we'll probably end up getting into it. I'm going to try to get a YouTube video out for Fish at the Moment where we get a minnow expert, probably get Jimmy in the boat too, and talk about it. But if you had like 2 pieces of advice, Jimmy, on the minnow, what would you say are like the 2 common mistakes you see guys make that would elevate the minnow game? I'm asking too because I need some help.
Okay, so the first thing is I say the rod's huge. The rod is big, so I've thrown a bunch of rods on it, different types of rods, and I'm not going to tell you like a specific brand, but like the medium light rod is huge. I've even thrown on a light rod. And you hear guys say medium light. I mean, I've caught fish with it well with the light. The other day, even the light one caught my biggest with it. One thing, too, I would say here's one I say mistake or teaching point, okay? And it's helped some people and not helped people. And this is something you don't hear nobody talk about because it's all about the shake. And now here's the next thing, so guys, I'll say, because this is a forward-facing bait, but I've caught fish without forward-facing. Like even – there's been multiple times on trips when it's windy, we see fish on a ledge, or I know the fish are in the trees. Like I told you about Table Rock, we're out there fishing trees. It's windy. I'm throwing down there. I have the count in my head. I know how to shake. I know it's around fish, and I can catch them without it. I've done it in different scenarios. So, but it goes back to the shake. And with the shake, there's times where you got to shake it more and less, but the reel handle is important. So you always got told, I'm a right-handed bait caster guy. Right-handed. For some reason, everybody said you had to reel a spinning rod on the left hand. And I get it. You throw, it's there, okay? But if you some reason jerk a jerk bait and you're holding the rod in your left hand and you're reeling here, jerk, jerk, then all of a sudden you're here doing the opposite. That's something I've learned with people being in the boat. They can't shake it with that right hand if they normally hold it in the left. So for me, I was always a weird guy anyway. Weird. I bait cast right hand, okay, right hand, and I go spinning rod right hand. So I try to tell people, hey, move that spinning rod handle over, and try to be comfortable. Now, some guys just aren't comfortable, but they shake it better. So that shake's important. So if you're really struggling with it, give that a shot. Look at Jacob Wheeler. Look at Cannell. Their spinning reel handle is on the same size their bait cast handle, okay? There's other pros too, by the way. And you can find old Jacob Wheeler footage when it used to be on the other side. I'm just going to put that out there.
That is, I never thought about that. I'm about to go switch my reels starting tomorrow.
But Jacob is phenomenal casting. So he can still cast left hand. And, like, I kind of struggle. I can do it. I can't throw it 100 feet yet. Like, I can throw it 30, 40. Like, well, I'm talking spinning reel. I can flick the bill and do this and then here. But with that bait caster with my right hand, I can cast it now. And that's one thing I do when I watch these professional anglers is how they cast. Jacob, I think right now is the best caster. Like, just watching him, and I do this because I was a former quarterback. I coach quarterbacks. I love watching the techniques and throwing motions, okay? But Jacob Wheeler is phenomenal with it, okay? But, yeah, Johnny, switch that thing over. I guess I haven't told you that.
You haven't told me that. You've been holding out on me. So
another
thing on the rod I've heard recently, big deal, is a fast or extra fast tip on the rod. You don't want a moderate action rod because a moderate action means it's going to be slower to react. So when you try to shake it, you won't be able to actually get a shake with a moderate action. And there's a lot of moderate action spinning rods. I actually screwed that up, Jimmy. I went and looked at my rods. Every spinning rod I have in my boat right now is a moderate action because that's the action I liked with swim baits, with shaky heads. I could pull into them with the braid. I don't have a fast action rod, so I have 2 Denali rods coming in the mail right now. They're fast action spinning rods. So I think that plus switching the reel, that's some great advice. So
So
On the head sizes.
somebody the other day said that to me. Like I was throwing a medium light rod, but I had a couple different actions, and I was catching fish with them in the winter. But someone noticed because I just went to the level rods, and they're like, "Hey, you all of a sudden, like your rod and stuff's different." I was like, "Yeah, I got the medium light fast action." I was like, all of a sudden, it's all kind of dialed in now. So
That's interesting. So, what weights do you normally go with on your heads? There was a question about that. Like, what size weights do you use?
When the post spawn period happened, quarter like on deep clear lakes like Lake Ouachita to Gray, we're talking about April, May, June. Quarter and 3/8 are my two heads. You can have a 3/16, and there's a couple other like 5/16, but keep it basic and less spending money. A quarter, 3/8. Right now, it's been a quarter. After that thermocline broke up, I'm about to bust the 3/8 out. And for like some of these shallower lakes, I like a quarter, but when the winter comes, it's going to be a half and 5/8. Like I'll have a 3/8 up there and maybe a quarter because you got to read which ones they're going to eat that day because there's a times they might want to slower or in their face. But we've learned, and I mean, there's been guys talk about it. Tristan McCormick talked about it on Bass Talk Live, and I didn't like that he did it, but it is what it is. I like to help people. But it was after the Ouachita event, and he was like, "Man, that half ounce, it makes them react. You get to the fish faster because they're deeper." And we were already on that. Like, so we learned that half and 5/8. So I kind of keep it simple: quarter, 3/8, half, 5/8.
That's interesting. So that's kind of, and that's what you use the freeloader as your main bait, right? The 4-inch freeloader.
For the post spawn through summer, yeah. Like I walked in Bass Pro today, and they were like, "You get more freeloaders?" And I was like, "Nope, I got like 40, 50 packages of them." And guys, I'm not affiliated with Rapala, by the way. It just catches fish, and I know it's been made good, or like it's a good product. But so that's been my more summer bait. But for the winter, it was the Baby Z2. There's that X Zone one that we're throwing that was a little smaller. I like the smaller kind of baits. But the freeloader is the main one. Now, there was a video on my channel at DeGray in the winter where we caught them on the freeloader. That was, I think, because we were fishing stained water that day. But clear water, we were going small.
For sure, yeah. And there's a comment from Laney. He says, "Can't believe, he thinks I'm trolling that I don't have a fast action spinning rod. I literally don't. I went actually in my attic and I went through all my old Quantums and Abu Garcias. I'm working with Denali now. And I was going to go grab a Quantum rod, one of my old discontinued ones. I don't have a fast action like spinning rod. I purposely never got fast action spinning rods because I don't like them. Like I had one maybe a long time ago, but I always like moderate action spinning rods. That's my preference, and it doesn't work for the minnows. I purposely always avoided fast action spinning rods. So that's just it was a weird thing with me. But one thing that's kind of trending now, Jimmy, and this is something that I think that is going to be really interesting to watch. There's a lot of guys now who are going on the lighter side of what you're going because they're starting to fish the minnow in shallow water and really high up in the water column. And so I got a bait right here. This is what a lot of guys have been catching them on the northern swing, and also some guys catching them on the Tennessee River. And I think this is going to be one of those baits for 2025 that's going to be dominant. You're going to hear a bunch of guys talking about it or not talking about it and trying to hide it. And that is the 6, 7, and 8-inch depth Sakamata shads and the big like 6.5-inch Raid super fish rollers. These big Demiki style baits. Like the flutter spoon, these fish rollers and the Sakamatas, they have a bigger profile, they draw bigger fish, they draw more fish, and when you're trying to catch 5 fish, it's a lot more conducive to catching a big one, and you don't get a lot of those smaller ones to even eat it out of the school. You get the biggest fish out of the school to eat it. But there's a lot of guys who are fishing these around 5, 8, 10-foot brush piles and rock piles and stuff, and they actually just dropped a brand new head on it was the hookup tackle, and it's the range roller head, but which is like the most popular head for this sort of deal, but it's a 5/0 5 gram and a 5/0 8 gram range roller head. And this deal is sweet because it's a way bigger hook, which fits better with those 6 and 7-inch Sakamata shads. But this is a 5 gram is 3/16 ounce, 8 gram is a 1/4 ounce. And so with this 3/16 ounce head in this 6 and 7-inch Sakamata shad, it kind of has the fall almost of like an 1/8 ounce head because there's a lot of big chunks of plastic there. And there's a lot of guys who are trying to use this bait around shallow cover, shallow rocks. They're fishing it like down bluff walls and stuff and dropping stuff everywhere. And so this is a little sneaky deal. I think this is going to be big. I'm going to start throwing this even as soon as tomorrow. We also have some new 5/0 hover rigs we came out with specifically for this technique because we heard about this. I've heard about this a while ago. And so we came out with a 5/0 eighth and a 5/0 1/16 ounce hover rig, which really causes these like 6 and 7 inch baits to just barely sink, and you can roll them and almost fish it like a spook. Really tights the surface. So we kind of talked about what the future, the title of this stream was like the future of forward facing or whatever and baits and stuff. I think these bigger flukes, bigger than the freeloaders and the mooch minnows and all the stuff people are throwing, is going to be a trend. And I could see a lot of guys trying to go not only use the heads that are the 3/16 and the quarter, but also doing 1/2 ounce and 3/4 ounce heads with these really big size baits. What are your thoughts on that, Jimmy?
We've talked about it a little bit before the stream here, and I think you're right. There's going to be new ways of like taking the normal jig head minnow. How can we make it better, or how can we find new ways to do it? And like you said, the glide bait thing. We've learned a lot about the glide baits, but it's hard for those guys at that level win on just a glide bait. It might catch 1 or 2 fish that are factors, but the minnow, we know it can catch 5 fish every tournament. If you're going for 5 or your day, you can catch a lot of fish. But I see, we used to throw big flukes. Like, and that bait right there, I got one right here. That bait, when it is put out in full, it's the same size of this hair jig. And this hair jig for me was a big bait this summer that we caught a lot of fish with, fishing it traditionally and throwing it fish like, with forward face, because of forward face and sonar. But this is the same size as that when it has all the water on the hair. And now this is a little heavier. So when you put that up, I thought about this hair jig, like, hey, that's the same size. For me, that was going to be something I was going to work on this fall period when I can actually go out and make content and practice on my own. Is like a lake like Hamilton, for instance. I was about to go, because a lot of fish guys at Hamilton stay shallow. There's big fish shallow. I was going to try to get on this and make it happen. But at times it's hard for me with my schedule because I'm taking people out. I got to show them stuff that I'm really good at and confident with. and that's what, but during my off time, I want to make this happen. I want to learn about it. And I'm excited to see.
Well, one of my number one baits recently when I've been doing my trips, I did like a month where I didn't use forward facing sonar. When I wasn't using live scope, rack target or anything, this raised super fish roller, 6.5 inch super fish roller, and I'm actually using the 6/0 1/4 ounce HD hover rig. It's a really big hover rig, and you put the weight in the very top of that swim bait, and this thing rolls like crazy, and you can just bounce your rod and that bait will roll side to side. And I was fishing this in 25 to 35 feet of water over the top of brush piles and schools and stuff, and I didn't want to get the bait too close to the rocks and the brush and everything because I couldn't see it on forward facing. But this was still catching them. In my assumption, I couldn't see them on forward facing, so I wasn't 100% sure. But I was trying to fish at like 10 feet, 15 feet down. And I think these fish were coming up out of 20 to 30 feet of water to come eat this thing because it had so much flash and it had such a big profile. And it was awesome. And I'm catching much fish on it. And I've caught them on it since without, or when I'm using forward facing too. That's how I figured it out, was on Grand Lake with it. And this thing is freaking sweet. So bigger flukes I think is going to be a big trend starting in 2025. I think it's catching on. And when we say trends, guys, some of these trends are things that have been happening for a long time and just no one has talked about. So when it finally hits the mainstream, it's probably already been in the pros arsenal for 2 years, 3 years. And one of the baits we're going to talk about with that is actually a bait that someone called out earlier, and that is actually the thumbnail of this live stream. And that is the Jackal Riser. So this bait came out in like 2017. I've actually had some of these Jackal Risers since like, I don't know, 2020 or whatever. And I've thrown them a bit. I caught some fish on them. I was never like 100% sold on them because I didn't really know how to work it, what the application was. I catch some fish when they were schooling and stuff on it, but I didn't really have that many applications for it. But then Jimmy gave me a call and was like, dude, the bait, this is the juice. And I also noticed when I was watching some pro videos, and I'm not going to call them out, but this bait contributed to at least one Bassmaster Elite Series win this year. I saw a 5-pounder get called out in the video. They were hiding it on live, but in the YouTube video, you could see it. And there's a lot of guys who are catching these fish on the herring lakes and all over the place. I still am not like got the riser figured out fully. I have them out, but Jimmy, you've been catching them. And actually, I'm excited to hear this because I haven't even like asked you that much about it because I wanted to save it for the stream. But tell us the riser juice because the Jackal Riser is definitely a deal.
So this one actually, I just looked right before we started the live stream. This is the mirror with Wakasagi, and there was a few on Tackle Warehouse for sale. And if I was not doing the stream, I would have, and I don't have my wallet, I would have ordered some. So anyway, I'm just, putting that out there. This has been one of my colors. But guys, so what about this? And this has been my first year really catching them with it, okay? I've caught a lot of fish with it, a lot. And I've had a lot of good trips with it. Guys, once again, like in July, I was on the lake 21 of the 31 days. And August, I was on the water 16 of the days. So, and this has been a guy for a lot. But there are a lot of ways to fish this with forward-facing sonar, as I've done. The traditional way you hear is throwing it at schooling fish. You can fish this up and down the bank. But I heard about this 2-3 years ago, and I couldn't get any. They're hard to get. Johnny had some and was like, dude, it's kind of, I haven't figured it out. I heard about it last year. But last year I was fishing lakes where they were eating bigger bait fish this time of year. That's why that spoon was so well. And anyway, now I'm here in Hot Springs. Walked in the store, saw them, bought them, and all of a sudden I was catching them before on the hover rig. And so these fish that I was chasing were in groups near ledges, points. They're in main river channels on your lake, and they're not always eating bait, but they're out there just swimming. And the hover rig was catching them. Well, all of a sudden the hover rig stopped, and then this guy thrown past them and worked right under the surface. It's a light twitch of my handle. I got a video out there on my channel with 2 fish catches with the live scope recordings with it. So you kind of can see it there, but it's all over my Facebook and stuff. So I'm just working it. And this thing under the water darts, and you just work it just kind of softly. You don't got to go crazy. And it would draw fish up anywhere. I've had fish from 10 to 12 foot come up and eat it. I've had fish come up and eat it off ledges, not just swimming and schooling, but it's been a player for me in that factor. Colors have been like this is that Mirror Wakasagi. I like the Mirror Wakasagi one. What's the Bones caught some fish. There's also a company in Arkansas called 34 Tackle, and I don't know this guy, but he has some baits in the store, but he has custom painted ones, and so I've used some of his custom painted ones as well. So it's pretty neat, Johnny. There's other different ways you could fish it, I know. But for me, it's been, like I said, finding these groups, and they're not always schooling. Like people think it's just a schooling bait. I'm finding them under the surface and pulling them up. Now, there are times on my trips I've had this happen. 2 people's in the boat. They're schooling. They're throwing this and catching them. I'm not throwing. I pan my live scope over here, okay, like 20, 30 feet away from them schooling. I see 2 or 3. I throw this past them. I work. They come up and fight for it, and it's typically a 3 or 4 pounder. The bigger fish are like out there hanging out. So it's a player. And this year is funny because I watched them catch them with it. I know what pro you're talking about, and there's a couple others. But it's still funny how they're on live and they try to keep this stuff quiet, And then here we are talking about it. And I talked about it on The Buzz, our little radio show. It's not little. It's the big radio show in Central Arkansas. And when I put this out there, I had a bunch of text messages. Some were pretty mean. I got cussed by some people.
Well, and there's, again, these are baits that you probably haven't maybe heard of as much, but it's becoming mainstream. And I always say when these baits are in your tackle shop, like I went into my local tackle shop, Hook, Line, and Sinker by Beaver Lake, and there was a wall of these things. And I was like, uh-oh, well, that bait's done. And that's kind of how I think about it. Like whenever these baits get out and get popular, they're good on if people aren't throwing them, they'll still be good. But once more people start throwing them, they start losing their effectiveness. And one thing I find interesting, Jimmy, you always talk about is that baits will lose their effectiveness even week to week or within a week if you're fishing the same groups of fish. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because like you always say, like, man, I was catching them on this, then they shut off, and I haven't caught them on it in 3 weeks. And I don't understand how it's possible because it's like a whole lake thing. It's not even, I know it's not a whole lake thing, but it's like a good chunk of a section of a lake, like a 2-3 mile area. They'll kind of get off of it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's what's happened right now with us is like I've been on Hamilton mostly, and I fished Washita to Gray, but like there's been like, it's funny because like they ate the minnow for 2 weeks, and then went to the hover rig, then we caught them on a walking bait, And this is just what we're catching most of our fish on, 20, 30 fish days, most of the fish. Then they quit eating the walking bait. Then they ate the riser. And then they kind of stopped eating the riser. We caught some on it the other day. But then the next thing, which I got a video on tomorrow, and I'm gonna do the present real quick. It's funny, I made a video on it, and I've learned more since the video. Like, I made the video 2 weeks ago. It's already edited and ready. But then all of a sudden, I've caught more fish with it. I'm like, man, should I make this video? But it's the Berkeley Credge. The Berkeley Credge has been our guy the last 2 to 3 weeks. And I've learned with this, it's funny because when this lure came out, guys, it was all about the jerkbait. It goes back. So the Credge is a jerkbait, guys. You've probably heard about it, but just in case, the bill's backwards. It flutters backwards and shimmies. And, we're thinking that would go in a fish's face and hit it. This is the winter, the spring. But you didn't hear much about it when it came out. I didn't catch fish with it. If people did, it was quiet, but like Justin Hamner still won the classic on a jerkbait. So, in my experience, they were eating a jerkbait, not this guy. Well, all of a sudden, we started talking about it and pulled it back out of the box, and we started fishing this similar to this guy. But what I noticed, and I did more of it, when you jerk your rod and you get the jerk and the shake right, it's a bait caster. Now, you can throw a spinning rod, but it does this right here. It goes back and forth in the water. And guess what else does this? This guy. Okay? So I started noticing that, and we would not just throw this at fish that were roaming. We're talking like Friday, fish are in a cover, brush pile, rocks. We let this sink, start working it, and we never stop. And they just come up and hammer it. As soon as it stops and it kind of shimmies back at them, I've not caught any fish doing that. Somebody has. There are YouTube videos on it. But we just keep working, and I think the weight distribution in this keeps it that perfect kind of rolling action. And it kind of moves around a little bit. But like right now they're on this, and like I told you, what's going to be next? They've not ate this as well, and it's not because I think they've just seen it so much. It could be, but they all of a sudden transitioned to a little bigger bait, and some of that I think has been the wind. I told you it's been real windy, wavy. They can't see this as well, but they can see this guy. But I've caught fish with this out of brush piles, rock, grass. The Friday we caught some fish out of grass with it too. But yes, so it's pretty interesting how the fish do transition and change. And I think this guys will be a player in 2025. I see a tournament somewhere, this being a player, but it fish shallow. I talked about my video that's coming out tomorrow. I think you can turn live scope off, throw this around docks, shallow, the outside edge of shallow grass, and catch fish. I think it's going to be a lure that's another potential shallow player, and it's just not out there. Someone's doing it, but it's not out there yet.
That's interesting. So we got the Credge from Berkeley. We have the Jackal Riser, kind of similar baits. It's almost like, I know this is like, I think this is the 007 riser. There's like the 009, which is like the bigger riser, which is probably equivalent to like the Credge size. Strike King's coming out with another knockoff. They're next in the long line of knockoffs. They're knocking off the riser, so we'll see how that goes. But I do think it's really interesting because you have all these baits, and some of these baits have been around for a long time, but they're kind of gaining popularity or they're gaining traction, like the Sakamata shad. I've been throwing the Sakamata shad for like 3 years now, and I've been throwing this since like 2021, and I actually just threw the 8-inch size. That was like my deal. I had a ton of packs of the 8-inch Sakamata. I was using it very specific situations, burning it over brush piles and stuff, and now the smaller sizes are big. So there's all these baits, and I wanted to think about what are some baits that we could potentially talk about that are really popular potentially, but there's variations or things that are kind of been forgotten. And I have a couple, but do you have any other baits, Jimmy, there that you want to talk about before I get into my deals? If you have anything else that's like sneaky.
I'm not on it yet, but you mentioned it earlier, the hairy dice and the hairy ball game. Like I have one here rigged up with the wacky shot hook, one of the older wacky shot hooks. I've tried. I don't have the confidence in it, but I know this catches fish. And there's a lot of other things those Japanese guys do that we're watching, and that's sneaky and we're learning about. But that's one. But I'm curious to see what you're about to say, because I know what I'm about to talk about.
So we got the hairy dice. I know that Matt Becker has been catching them with the core tackle wacky shot and the OSP dice bait. catch him on Lake Cumberland and a few other places around in his area. So he sent me some videos where he was catching him on the dice. So I don't really believe in the dice. I need to try it, I guess, but I don't know. I'm skeptical, but we'll see. But here's two baits that I'm really, really bullish on right now. And it's one of these baits is a bait that there's not been very many made. I've talked about it on my YouTube channel. You've thrown it, Jimmy. And this is my number one bait in March on Beaver Lake. They're really hard to get now because they're not selling them online. But if you guys are local, this guy. This is the Little Bender by Bent Bill Customs. It is a 5-inch glide bait from tail to, like the actual body of the bait's 5 inches. And this bait is an absolute killer. It's so good. It has an amazing drawing power for a 5-inch bait. You can catch a lot of smaller fish and bigger fish on it. If you guys want to pick them up, there's some that just got dropped off at Hook, Line, and Sinker in Rogers, Arkansas. And then they also sell some at Tulsa Tackle if you're in the Tulsa area. Those are the only two places I think you can get them. Baitworks had them for a while. I helped to get them in there, and they haven't made an order. So I don't know what's going on there. So that was the only place you get them online. But this little mini glide bait, the thing about this bait is it has an amazing balanced swim. There's a lot of mini glide baits that just don't work very well. And I was skeptical of this when I first saw it, but as soon as I tie it on my rod, it works like a big glide, like a big custom made, like if you're throwing like a KGB or a Clutch Co. or any of those like really big glide baits, it works in a very similar, like, it feels similar. It doesn't have the same action, I guess, but it doesn't feel like a toy. I think a lot of the small glide baits that I've thrown, they feel like, they don't really work. You can't manipulate them. They don't have a good action to them. And this definitely does have a really good glide bait style action, and it draws fish like crazy. I mean, the guy who makes it, we watched him catch 15 pounds of fish on Beaver Lake off the bank in 10 minutes with this thing. He then jumped in our boat, he only had 2, so he gave us the 2 he had, and in 30 minutes, we caught like 15 fish that went 19 pounds on beaver. And this was March, 48-degree water temperature, and they were just coming unglued on this thing. And it's died off a little bit in my area because the fish are so deep. There are some schooling fish and stuff that can eat it, but most of the big fish are like in 30, 40 foot of water right now on beaver. But come the fall again and into the winter, this is going to be an absolute it's going to be crazy. So, the guys from Northwest Arkansas area, kind of where I'm at. So that's Bent Bill Customs, the Little Bender glide bait. That thing is sweet. Jimmy, you've thrown it a little bit. What are your thoughts on it? You didn't have it in the prime time. You had it more in the summer, but
I didn't have it in the prime time. I remember you telling us about it, and I was like, this is crazy. But then I saw the pictures, so he's telling the truth, and wish you could have made a video on all that because it was pretty wild. So, but I like it. I've caught fish with it. I think it's for the glide bait game, I feel more confident throwing that than the big ones because just me, I've had some good days with the glide bait. I'm not Ben Milliken by any means or any of those top glide bait guys. But like down here where I'm at, it's like when the glide bait happens, it happens. But that might happen 1 out of 60 days. You know, you might catch a fish on it here and there. But I think that thing is going to be a consistent lure for the size. And for like my lakes and hot springs, it's a player. I've caught some good fish with it this summer. You know, I did a day where I've thrown it. I wanted to throw it some more recently, but I've just kind of kept in the box because I got one of them, and I want to make sure I don't lose that thing. So I'm trying to get another one as well. They're hard to get.
Yeah, they're hard to get. The thing about them, I think this bait's like a 60-degree water and below bait from what I've seen. Maybe up to I was catching them in the post spawn really well. I had like 4 doubles one day on it when I didn't have the cameras on, which was really sad. But literally 4 doubles on Beaver Lake is not bad, and that was like end of April. Yeah. So it's really, really good when the time is right. It's kind of a situational bait. The fish need to be setting up kind of higher in the water column, a little bit more aggressive. So that's one bait. The other bait's on the opposite end of the spectrum, similar size, but completely different water column. So similar size bait, but this is my favorite crankbait now. I've caught more fish on this bait, more big fish on this bait on beaver this year than any other bait. And I know a lot of guys who are catching big fish on Grand and like winning tournaments and stuff on this bait. and it's not talked about very much. They have them in Tulsa Tackle, so that's a little bit of a bummer for me, but they don't have them in my local tackle shops around Beaver, so that's good, at least for now. And this is the OSP Blitz Magnum EXDR. Now, this crankbait's scary because it's $30, so sticker shock for a crankbait, one. But with forward-facing sonar, this bait becomes an absolute animal because, one, it has such a long bill that you can deflect it off brush and rock and everything. I have 4 of them, and I have yet to lose one. I've had a scary moment with a plug knocker where I got one hung, and I had to drop my hound dog lure retriever down, but it picked it up, no problem. But as long as you don't go crazy with this thing, you can work this through brush and rock and all that stuff, no problem. And this is a 30-foot diving crankbait on like 12-pound test. I throw it on 15-pound because I don't want to lose it. But I can get it down to 25 feet of water on a long cast. And this bait works so well when you bring it down to the bottom or against a brush pile or whatever. Stop it, let it rise up. It rises super slow. Twitch it like a jerkbait. Twitch it like a jerkbait. Twitch it like a jerkbait. And it just hangs in the water column. It's perfectly weighted where it just hangs there. And you fish this basically like a 25-foot jerkbait, but you can also burn it. You can't really burn a jerkbait super well, so you can burn this thing and really generate some reaction strikes, but you can also just kind of crawl it and just twitch your rod and just walk that bait side to side. And even as recently as like 2 days ago out on Beaver, it was 3 days ago, I guess, last Friday, took this thing out, and I was catching them in 26 to 27 feet of water on this thing, cranking the mouse of like little ditches where a creek channel would cut into a ditch, and there were just little rocky spots and stuff, and I was hammering them on this thing on Beaver. And this bait is just so good, and it's under the radar, and I do think there's going to be a lot more guys throwing crankbaits next year in tournaments because I know there's guys doing it. It's not being talked about, but I feel like a crankbait just has a different profile to a jerkbait, and it gives some different advantages. And I think cranking with forward-facing sonar, because we know how deadly crankbait fishing is, but utilizing forward-facing sonar and cranking, not just doing your normal throw your crankbait out, reel it in, but like working the fish with forward-facing and the crankbait is going to be a big deal, I think, in 2025, because it's been my number one big fish technique all year has been like basically fishing a deep diving crankbait like a jerkbait, even more so than catching on a jerkbait.
Yeah, and one thing too we got to remember, which I like, in some of these tournaments, like on professional fishing, the rules are changing. So like MLF about to have 1 period of live scope, 2 not. That does change a way too. Now what I would take into is how I know how those fish react to lures, how they set up. But like NPFL going no live scope, it's going to be curious to see how some of these other techniques could come back, or how these new techniques and knowing what we do can be used, like that crankbait. Like I've told you, there's been days this year we've had a couple of weeks where that crankbait bite was fire down here, but it's not been as good of a lure this year for me as last year. And we talked about that. Like it seems like every summer and maybe winter there's a new lure. Like not the new lure? It's a different lure that's fire than the year before. And so this year a crankbait, we had 2 weeks on it where it was great. But last year, I caught fish on it all the way through the winter. I mean, it was crazy last year. I mean, every trip I was catching big fish. But people see me, I like to reel it fast. But I like to stop it. I like to do the jerk. This year on Hamilton, there were times we were jerking it over brush piles. We're reeling it, killing it, seeing them come up and just twitch, and boom, something about that fatter jerkbait floating, fatter crankbait floating compared to a jerkbait created reaction stripes. I've not got that one yet, but I want to. I've been scared of the sticker price. It's kind of hard to find, but I want to get it. It's just I can't just buy one. I got to buy multiple, and I've just held off right now. I can buy 2 spoons for $40 or 2 crankbaits for $60. I can get 3 spoons for $60. You know what I'm saying? So anyway,
and that's
I'm going to get on that though.
That's what a lot of guys are talking about too, like the minnow. You can catch fish in the same situations with both the minnow. It's kind of the same profile, but the minnow's a lot less expensive than the crankbait. I love fishing crankbaits. I've had this bait, though. Like, as soon as they dropped in the U.S., I bought this bait. So, like, I've had this bait since as soon as it was available from a U.S. retailer. And I've been throwing it for a while now. So, this Blitz Magnum EXDR is, like, it's my jam. And there's kind of baits like that for me. I have some baits here that I have kind of got ahead of the curve on. And I will tell you, when you find a bait that you can get ahead of the curve on that other guys aren't throwing, it's magic. Again, talked about how I was throwing the Demiki rig in 2021, late 2020, early 2021, doing the minnow stuff when no one else was doing it. And it was funny, I was fishing Beaver Lake, and I was talking to all the guys around, and they're like, they don't eat on Table Rock. You can't do the center of the ditch thing like you do on Table Rock. Those fish just don't set up as well. And there's some guys who kind of did it, but it wasn't very well known. And I was absolutely destroying them going around doing the Demiki thing, but it wasn't like how they do it on Table Rock. It was different. It was more of the isolated suspended fish, but that's what people are doing now with the minnow. And now it's this crankbait. Guys not throwing that U with the flutter spoon. I think that's kind of the key, is finding stuff that just isn't in everyone's repertoire, that not everyone has access to, or not even access to, but they're just not throwing in your area. I would honestly recommend, guys, if you're a tournament angler and you're wanting to be successful in tournaments, or you just want to be more successful catching fish, if you go to your local tackle shop and it's available there, probably don't throw it. That would be that's a really good rule of thumb. I'm not saying that those things won't work, and you can always catch fish on jigs and things like that, but if you can find a bait that's not in your local tackle shop, chances are then those fish are not seeing it as much, and you have a lot higher chance of actually getting those fish to react and bite. And it was crazy to me, Jimmy, because we did this. I did my video last week with both Matts, Becker, and Stefan, and we were looking at the Major League Fishing results. And on average, the bottom 10 guys out of 40 caught 3 fish per day. After 2.5 days of practice, best anglers in the world. The best anglers in the world are catching 22 fish a day on average, and that's the top 5. The top 5 is 22 fish a day average. That's really good deal, but that's really 3 fish per hour. So if you can get to a situation where you can maybe be catching 3 fish a day to 5 fish a day, and you get a bait that no one's throwing, you can take that to 10 fish a day without changing anything in your preparation, where you're looking, all that stuff. It can make that big of a difference. And you've probably seen that as guiding, that bait can make such a big difference. Would you agree?
Yes, 100%. And that was one thing, this last year, even when that hair jig bite was happening, it was crazy how they wanted it, at times. It was a deal. I get people that've never thrown the hair jig, and there's even some other lakes, not just the Central Lakes, but down there, Southwest Arkansas, those lakes where that bite, when it happens, and it goes back we fished it for how you do your instructional videos on it, and it was you could throw other stuff there, they wouldn't touch it. That hair jig, real click, boom. And all of a sudden I got people that's never thrown it, we're catching them, and sometimes it is a bait deal, but still people might not have confidence in it. You just mentioned the jig will still catch fish. It's funny how last weekend at Lake Maumelle, 2 tournaments may have been won on a football jig. Just putting it out there. The other stuff still catches them. And I talked to one of my clients today. One of my clients that I had at we did a Table Rock trip. He did really good in the past couple of weeks at Stockton. He's like, dude, they're eating a jig. I'm like, man, it's football season. Football season, they eat a football jig. So yeah.
Well, and that's
you might be hearing my little one right now. If you do, I'm sorry. He's ready to sit down.
No, it's fine. Well, and that's what people earlier, I think it was Devin who commented about Tyler Williams. He's just going to catch him on a brown jig. I also think a little bit of that is played up for the camera. I think he catches him on some other stuff too. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't think he's just throwing a jig. There's probably a few other things he's sneaking in there. But what I've heard, at least with Tyler, his focus is he's targeting individual fish that are on individual pieces of cover. So he has a fish on a stump or a log or whatever, and he's going to make 30 casts with his forward-facing sonar on that log because he knows the fish is there. And so you'll hear interviews like, oh, I'm just a structure fisherman. I'm just an old-school fisherman, and I just kind of have live scope on the boat. But that's not telling the whole story. You can't look at a stump under the water and know there's a quality fish there and then make 30 casts at it in something you can't see, just because, and then you can see how the fish moves around your jig. It's almost like bed fishing, but in the middle of the year. It's kind of what they're doing. And that jig for him is a bait he knows how to manipulate and do that with. But he's fishing for fish that most guys make 1 cast at, and then they move on. Or 2 casts at. But he's going to work that fish and work it and work it and work it. And that's a completely different style of fishing. And in that case, the bait is less important because he's fishing in a style that no one else is doing. Where if you're fishing for like suspended fish in the middle of ditches and drains and stuff like that. Other guys are doing that now, so you need a unique bait. Or if you're fishing an offshore ledge in the Tennessee River, you need something that's unique. You need something different because these fish have seen it all. So if you don't want to get into the bait stuff, I guess that's what I'm getting at. If you just want to say, I'm a jig fisherman, or I'm a crankbait fisherman, you then need to figure out how to use forward-facing sonar or use fishing styles that are going to give you an advantage over other anglers. Like John Cox. He's going to take his aluminum boat and run it as far up a creek that no one else can run into or is scared to run into, and he's going to pick apart every laydown. He's going to find a piece of water where he can visually see the fish and like wacky rig them and sight fish or look for fish moving in small grass patches. And he's getting his boat where no one else is going, so those fish are not that pressured. And even when they are a little bit pressured, he's doing unique things within it. So that's how kind of a lot of the guys who are really, really good at fishing do it, is they find a unique bait or they find a unique style that no one else is doing. And again, if you don't want to do forward facing or don't want to pick up the baits, or you just want to go to Walmart and buy all your tackle, that's perfectly fine. But you're going to have to figure out some unique, sneaky stuff that is unpressured or less pressured to get consistent results. Would you agree with that, Jimmy?
I do. And like I said, there's still some ways, like how Tyler Williams is fishing that jig. And I know some guys have figured out the worm and shaky head type of deal. But like always for me, like doing this, I always like to learn and do new things. So I'm just in a different situation. So that's why I like to learn. And I've picked up different baits. I wanted to learn that minnow. And I'm kind of excited for the upcoming year, like what's going to be the new thing to do. Or, we're just going to kind of stay through this for a year. But even, like talking about that flutter spoon, I mean, I got told by my group of friends that I fish with that are really good fishermen in Hot Springs. They said, Jimmy, you're never going to catch a fish on that flutter spoon in Hot Springs. And my first trip at Lake Ouachita, I got it done in cedar fish, in trees, in 30, 40 foot. But that kind of goes back to my style and what I know about it, okay? So you have your baits, figure out how you can catch fish like you hadn't before. But for me, I love learning. It's part of helps me get more excited about the sport. I like to teach and do new things. And one day we'll put it all together.
For sure. And there's some comments going on here about saying we need to make our own baits. Fortunately, we do. Core Tackle, Matt, Steph, and I own Core Tackle. We made the hover rig. Only company that had that for a while. There's been some recent knockoffs. Best of Show ICAST was one with a very close copy of our design for the molds, and then we got some new juice coming from Core Tackle too, Jimmy, that no one has, no one's seeing. One, I'm gonna show this off because we're getting this in production. We've reworked the Wacky Shot, so this is now the weedless Wacky Shot. And you guys probably have seen the Wacky Shot before with the spring down the bottom. It works really well with dice baits and like those type of baits, certain styles. But it's not that the best when you're fishing in like shallow cover, laydowns, grass. So we added this weed guard, but we also changed the position of the keeper where you screw the bait onto. So the way you basically would rig this, and this is not out yet. This is like a prototype. But we are putting them into production finally. We actually have a trocar hook in this, Jimmy, too. 100% American made. All the components, everything is produced, packaged, everything in the U.S. So it's our first 100% American-made product, too, which is cool. But all you need to do is just thread that bait onto the hook, and then you can spiral it on. You can move the weed guard out of the way. But you just spiral that onto the bait keeper here, and that holds that. It's an oversized hitchhiker that we had custom made for the Wacky Shot. This thing will hold your worm on like nothing else. The only thing that's going to cause it to go away is if a fish rips off like the tail, but you can skip this thing around all day, put that weed guard back in place. And this way we distributed the weight and the little keeper there, you can throw this through the middle of a grass bed, the middle of a laydown. I fish it through the middle of brush piles. And on forward facing, there are no guys who are throwing a Wacky Shot like this or a Wacky Rig worm through the dead heart of a brush pile. And the way we've designed that, you can throw this thing right through a brush pile, Wacky Rig. So it's pretty sick. So we're excited about that one. And then we also have another little rig that we don't want to mention the name of or anything like that, but I have a video posting tomorrow where I was catching him on beaver, and it was the only thing I can get him to bite on, and it is the Demiki rig replacement. Jimmy, you're going to be loving it because it's something that you've seen pictures of it. We're going to get some in your hands to test. Nobody has anything like it, and it's freaking hammer bait. It is
Mic
sweet.
went off.
I
There
think
we go. My mic went off. Now that's about to be my bait for this winter. Well, I was going to kind of keep that quiet, but we're talking about new baits and new techniques. That's about to be it.
yeah, it's pretty sweet. I can't wait to share. I don't want to share it yet because I feel like it's gonna get copied like that. Like it's one of those rigs that when you see it, you're like, holy crap. But the action's completely unique, different from what you mean. You've seen the videos I've sent, the underwater footage we have of it. It's crazy. So we're trying at Core Tackle to innovate and create new stuff and not try to just like copy what other people are doing, at least the best we can. There's some actually some wacky rigs that are out now that are kind of like this wacky shot. That there's a few rigs that are similar to it. They just don't have like the keeper on it. So we're trying to change it up a little bit and do the best we can to do stuff that's a little bit unique. So that's kind of what we're doing. And we have thought about doing soft plastics. Saw a comment about that earlier. Right now we're trying to get out all these other new rigs. So we only have so much capital that we can invest in new products and so much time and effort for marketing. So once we get all of these terminal tackle pieces out, Matt, Steph, and I have been talking about doing soft plastics specifically designed for like the Ozark rig, for the hover rig, for the wacky shot, for the new rigs we have coming out. And we think we can come out with some really cool stuff. We just want to get all of our terminal tackle ideas out first because we have some juice. We have another hook actually that Matt Becker is designing with us, and he was catching big ones out this past week also on that. So we have a collaboration with Matt Becker, the MLF BPT AOI for 2023. And so we have another forward-facing hook that he's working on with us. So we got some juice coming, some straight fire. At some point, Jimmy, you won't even need to throw any other baits. You just need to use Core Tackle, and you're good to go.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I can't wait to get there. One day. I already told you, like everybody, this little freeloader right here, we might make our own little thing, and I don't know what we're going to call it.
We're gonna roll it out and see what you guys think on that. But yeah, more on that to come. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this little breakdown of all these different video or different baits and things. Hopefully we can get out with Jimmy to some hammer little lakes here soon. We need to get out soon, Jimmy, because it's like prime time right now for these fish to catch like an 8 or 9 pounder on some of these little lakes. I see Milliken over there in Texas, and I'm like, he's catching these 10s, double digits. So yeah. Jimmy got word a couple little juice lakes. So we're not going to spoil them for you guys. We're not going to reveal the location. We'll do some Lake X situation, but we need to go try to catch a double digit or at least like an 8, an Arkansas double digit. If you catch an 8,
if you catch an 8 in Arkansas, that's equivalent, I think, to probably I'll say a 10 in Texas, but yeah, no, there's a couple lakes. I was actually thinking about my one that I like that it's further away from you. It's not one of those ones in between, but I was trying to find a way to get to it by in the next 2 weeks. I was like, man, I want to go. I've been catching some 4-pounders on Hamilton and 1 to 5, and I'm like, man, it's time to go catch another 7 or 8 pounder. Because last time I was there, I actually the old tush, the old Core Tackle and the tush caught my 7-8 there. So yeah, the old Johnny special.
For sure, yeah, we need to make that happen. If we got people asking to try the Demiki rig on both shoals, we need to get that. We were going to try to get it out. We have literally the prototypes out, guys. We got the one size in, and I have taken out on 2 trips and caught like 25 fish over my last 2, like combined over my last 2 trips on it. So it freaking works. We just need to figure out all the sizes on it. We have a 3/16 ounce size. We're trying to get a 1/4 and a 3/8. So once we get those dialed, we're gonna roll those out. So it's gonna be sick. But anyway, so that's awesome, Jimmy. We're gonna get out there and we're gonna hammer them hopefully soon on the lake. And thanks for joining me, sharing all this stuff. And we'll probably bring you back on again soon if especially if you get another little juicy bait to talk about, or maybe just talk about fishing in Central Arkansas and what you're learning. Because you always are sharing really cool stuff with me, so I always appreciate you giving me the scoop of what you're learning on the lake.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it, Johnny. Thanks, everybody. If you leave any comments down below, I'll try to go back and answer them. Johnny's seeing the questions. I don't get to see them. I was kind of curious. I was kind of curious there what people were saying, but appreciate you, man. I'm going to go get the kiddos, and yeah, we normally eat at 6 o'clock-ish, so yeah, we're going to go get this rolling.
For sure, man. And if you guys do want to check out any of Jimmy's content, he has great social media content. What's your social media handle, Jimmy?
Yeah, so my Jimmy Easterling Fishing Facebook, I post a lot there. I have it on TikTok too.
And my Instagram, it's all like Jimmy Easterling Fishing. But my YouTube channel is The Fishing Coach. I started The Fishing Coach later. I wish they were all the same, but my Facebook does so good. I'm just keeping it what it is.
That sounds good. So you got that. And then if you guys do want to reach out to Jimmy, you can reach out to him through his Facebook pages or through YouTube as well. I'm sure you have your email and stuff linked on there through YouTube if you want to check that out. He does on-the-water fishing lessons where he will go out in your boat, right? You'll go out in people's boats.
Yeah, I'll do it. About half the trips are in your boat. The other half are in my boat, depending on what you want. But yeah, most time I get in your boat. Like if it's that trip, I help dial in your electronics. We go to use them. I teach as much as I can about them to you guys. And sometimes I have forward-facing only lessons. I've done trips, guys, without live scope, by the way. You know, the old school Johnny, getting your boat side image and stuff. But just kind of depends what you want and your needs. And we can go over different seasonal patterns, techniques, this, that. Like I've done some lately. They're like, hey, how'd you catch them in the winter? Well, I go to show them and the fish just aren't there. But I show you, like, hey, this is what, how they, set up. But yeah, and then I do the guide trips as well. But the lessons are the big hit.
For sure. That's it's really cool that he's doing that. I did that when I first started out with my fish moment stuff, and I've kind of not found the time to be able to do it with core tackle and everything. But it's great that Jimmy's offering it, and he's a great angler, great teacher as well, former football coach, math teacher, so he can explain things in a great way. He's also great with kids, so if you guys want to take your kids out and have them learn how to, become a better forward-facing angler, just an angler in general, especially offshore fishing. Anything offshore fishing, Jimmy's the guy to go to. He's in the Central Arkansas area, so definitely hit him up. Well, appreciate you joining me, Jimmy. Thanks everyone who's been on the stream tonight for all the comments and questions. Always helps make the stream more engaging. And hopefully you guys are enjoying your night. Probably going to watch some football right now. I'm worried about these Monday night live streams with football, but
yes, but they'll go back and watch it. Hopefully
they're going to go back and watch it. Anyways, we'll figure that out. So appreciate it, guys. Thank you.